So what is recovery? Rest, rehydrate, refuel. We might need to think a little bit also above the body into the head and look at, again, mental strategies for recovery. There is no one size fits all. From Ben Earl's journaling to Aaron Kraskell playing on his PlayStation, we all have to find our own way to decompress. The more I can live in the moment, the more my physiology can move out of an alert state. It can be calm, and in being calm, it can restore energy. It can recover. Welcome to the Energy Equation optimised by Pure Sport. I'm Ollie Patrick, and in these bonus episodes, we want to provide a deeper dive into some of the subjects we cover on our guest interviews. We want to pick up some of the themes and go a little below the bonnet and see if there's more information we can glean and more learning we can pass on to you. And one of the key themes across pretty much every guest interview is recovery. What is this idea of recovery and how does it relate to everyone? We heard Aaron Kraskell uses his PlayStation as part of his recovery strategy. And Ben Earl, the England international rugby player, using an incredible blend of supplements and hydration and journaling. Well, if we take the basic phrase recovery, really, recovery is a biological return to baseline, which sort of means nothing, really, out of context. And it's easy to think of two types of recovery for the purpose of this discussion. The first type of recovery is the one I think most people lean to when they hear the word. And that is, how do I get over sport? How do I get over the exercise that I've just performed? And think of recovery one as return to play. If Ben Earl plays an intense rugby game on the Saturday, how does he wake up on the Sunday feeling okay and be able to train roughly or loosely on the Monday? That's return to sport. And I think that's enormously relevant because lots of us listening to this podcast do quite a lot of exertion. But there's also a lot of us listening to this podcast who don't train like an England international rugby player. And so does recovery mean anything to them? I think it does, but we need to think of recovery too, which is a return of energy. We've talked often across the energy equation about how challenging the modern day environment is. We have this phrase, anxiogenic environment, which means everything around you today is trying to make you anxious, be switched on, be alert. And what we're finding is that's exhausting. And that exhaustion is fairly unrelenting. So if we think of recovery too, we should be thinking about how do I restore energy in an environment that is constantly asking me to be switched on, available, and exerting energy. But I want to start with recovery one and this return to sport as our first principle. When we think of this recovery one, this return to play, we have to go back to that basic principle that exercise is predominantly damage. What I'm going to do in that hard run or those heavy weights or that stretching and mobility program is overwhelm my body's current ability. And in doing so, I'm going to tell it, I need you to be better. I want more muscle, or I want a bigger heart, or I want more blood vessels. But the way we get there is by damaging the body. And by protecting itself, it says, what I'll do, Ollie, is I'll regrow this system, but not just to where it was, but to a higher place, so that when this same challenge comes around in 2 days, in 3 days' time, you're better equipped to deal with it. So the body doesn't really know what the gym is. It doesn't know what sport is. It just thinks it's been given something that challenges it, and it wants to make all future incidences of that less challenging. Brilliant machine. And that process does create this cellular damage. We create small tears in our muscles. We create strain on the heart. We create, again, a stretch of our ligaments and tendons. And the repair process must undergo before the body really feels able to take on more load and more strain. So when we think of recovery, what we're looking at is this principle of what happens after I've given my body some form of load, and that load or strain may come in a small condensed burst, 20 minutes of high intensity exercise, or it might come over an aggregate of being extremely busy all day, climbing a mountain or hiking. But what we do see is there will be damage, and how we manage that damage will be a major part of how we move out of that state of potential soreness and being able to return to sport, return to play as pain-free as possible. So we do have to start when we think of return to play with the basics of what is this damage, and there's lots of things we could do before that damage that helps recovery, but let's think of the damage has taken place, what do I do next? And a bit like Ben Earl would consider his recovery strategy well in advance, maybe you could do so too, by starting with the 3 R's which are the foundation of good recovery, which is useful because recovery also begins with R. The first R would be rest. If I do some damage to my physiology, of course I need to rest it. We'll dive into that in a moment. The second R is going to be rehydrate. It's very likely that the energy I combusted in the task has utilized fluid. I combust energy in the presence of water. So if I've used all that water, how am I putting it back in, and any of the minerals or electrolytes that should be coming with it? And the third R is refuel. How do I replenish my body's stores of energy so that I'm ready to take on more strain and load? Rest, rehydrate, refuel. Let's drive into those three in detail. These days, it feels like every brand is shouting about how supplements are the answer to everything. But before you jump into the latest wellness trend, it's worth remembering that the basics come first. Hydration, good nutrition, rest, and movement. These are the foundations of feeling your best. When you do decide to supplement, what you choose matters. My advice is to look for products that are free from additives, free from artificial flavors and unnecessary fillers. Personally, having seen lots of professional athletes using their products, I decided to try Pure Sport supplements. Their products are built on science, they're backed with evidence, they've got minimal ingredients, and they do what they're meant to do. Whether it's their ultra electrolytes to keep you hydrated and energized, or their unwind product to improve your deep sleep. I trust what they make is developed with care to work with your body, not against it. As you set your goals for 2025, remember, it's not about quick fixes. It's about small, smart choices that support your long-term wellness. Explore the full range of Pure Sport at their website, puresport.co, and discover the clean, natural way to feel your best. Use the code EE10 at checkout for an extra 10% off. So I'm going to start with rehydrate, actually, because rest has got a slightly broader connotation. But hydration is a crucial part of daily life. You expend water in all key chemical reactions, and really we know that a small level of dehydration has a big impact on both energy, but certainly athletic or sports performance. When we see us losing fluid through sweating, we need to bear in mind we need to replenish that. And there's a pretty simple formula to this, that if I lose about 1 litre of water through sweat, that I probably need to intake 1.2 to 1.5 litres to make sure that I'm nicely hydrated. And that allows for some of the inefficiency of the human machine. Now, ultimately, when I'm starting to sweat to a level where I'd see some potential white or some salt on my t-shirt, or I'm notably seeing, again, a volume of sweat on the floor or my clothes, I'm probably also losing some potassium, some calcium, some magnesium, these electrolytes, and most notably sodium. And so the idea of adding electrolytes, particularly when I need more than 1 litre of water to rehydrate, is a very solid part of good rehydration. So from a recovery point of view, principle number 1 is if I'm losing fluid, I must replenish fluid. I can do some of that during the exercise at a much more controlled rate. I don't want a full tummy full of water or some kind of rehydrating liquid. But post-exercise, that hour, 2 hours post-exercise are really critical to re-input the water that I've lost plus electrolytes. That's strategy number 1. And that, again, will be determined by how hard you've worked, the climate you're in. There's a whole load of variables. But when we're thinking recovery, let's not overlook the simple steps first. Hydration, number 1. What about fuel? What was really interesting was a study brought to my attention by a friend, Baz Moffat from the Well HQ, who talks a lot about women's sport and women's health. And she noted a study on the lionesses, which showed that almost all, I think all but one of the lionesses, were failing to get adequate carbohydrate in their post-performance meal. So that's our female football team. Why is that relevant? Well, there's a natural fear in modern culture about carbohydrate, its potential role in overeating and its potential role in me gaining unnecessary fat. And that, unfortunately, has a broader cultural penetration into our female audience. Now, why I want carbohydrate post-exercise is I've probably used a lot of my stored carbohydrate in performing that task. So if I'm thinking strategy number 2, refuel, I've got to reconcile that probably my main fuel during exercise, lasting 45 minutes, an hour or longer, is going to be the stored carbohydrate I keep in my muscles and my liver called glycogen. So I eat that piece of bread, it goes through my digestive system, stores into my muscle, I go for the long run, I use it. but I want to repack my muscles and my liver with that carbohydrate. And actually, we used to be really interested in the timing of post-exercise refueling, thinking the first 30 minutes or hour was absolutely critical. The tempo on that has eased off a little bit. We're not as concerned, but certainly the first 4 hours post some form of meaningful exertion is a great time to pack the nutrients back into your cells to enable you to combust energy again. How much carbohydrate? It's tricky. It sort of depends on how much work you did, how hard it was. And we see studies saying anything between maybe 3 and even 12 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of your body weight over that 4-hour period, with really about 1 gram per kilogram per hour being a sensible barometer. So if I'm a 100-kilogram male and I've done something for an hour and a half or 2 hours, I might want to get 100 grams of carbohydrate for the first 4 hours in that post-recovery window. We also hear a lot about protein, which potentially gets a bigger press than carbohydrate because of people's worries about carbohydrate and sugars. But protein plays an equally important role in the post-recovery window. We generally like protein at about a 25% of our carbohydrate intake. So about a quarter of our carbohydrate intake, we'd match it with protein. So if I have 100 grams of carbohydrate, that'd be a lovely 25 grams of protein. And protein sources are going to be vital because protein does growth and repair. When we look at any biological textbook, it will tell you that's what protein does in my body. And I've just created damage, so I need the nutrient to allow protein synthesis or my body to repair that muscle damage or build those new blood vessels or make more blood or whatever wonderful things I'm expecting in that post-exertion window. Again, that used to be packed into that first hour that you had to smash that protein in before you left the walls of the gym or got off the football pitch. And we're a bit more relaxed about that now, that somewhere within that 4-hour window will do an enormously important job. So when we're thinking about exertion, we see a lot of people neglecting the fact they do need to put the fuels they used back into their system. If you're trying to lose weight, there's nuance to that. If you're training for a particular event, there's nuance to all of this. But when we look at, again, optimal recovery, I would want adequate carbohydrate, adequate protein, adequate liquid, and adequate electrolytes. They're the foundations. We should look there first. So what does rest mean? Well, rest can mean a lot of different things. You'd argue rest is just being away from the stressor, but is resting in front of a thrilling box set the same as being in a sauna or being in a cold water immersion or meditating or breathing? There's different categories to rest. And I think we've got to start breaking those down to understand how to optimize this word rest. When we start with rest from athletic pursuits or physical load, we do have to lean to our biggest opportunity for rest, which is, of course, sleep. Sleep, something we talk about frequently on the energy equation. And it's hard to overlook the basic principles of sleep, which is, did I get that minimum of 7 hours, looking towards somewhere between 7 and 9 hours on all nights? We know when we look back to some of the materials we've produced on sleep that the more exertion I put in, the more I create sleep pressure and I might need more sleep. So we might find my usual 7 hours needs to be 7.5 or 8 hours to really recover from the exertion that I've put in. Prioritizing sleep is vital, and we've talked in previous episodes with guests about the negative role that alcohol has on sleep and mid-afternoon caffeine. So if I'm wanting to optimize sleep, have I given adequate time to it? But also, have I avoided that natural propensity to celebrate my exertion with a post-exercise drink of alcohol or hypercaffeinated myself because I'm tired as a result of the exercise? Those two things might pay short-term impact, but long-term detriment. So when we're looking at sleep, prioritizing it, making it the hero of the story is a vital part, because for all the good exercise and exertion you perform, you grow and develop during sleep. It's all damage. The repair is where you get the good stuff, and the biggest opportunity for that is when your eyes are closed and your brain waves slow and your body moves into repair mode. When we think about rest outside of sleep, we're sort of drawn to this idea that the quality of my recovery will be born largely about how sore and uncomfortable I am and how unable I am to perform the daily tasks that I want to. You may have heard the phrase DOMS. People utter this in gyms and sports clubs across the country. But what does DOMS mean? Well, DOMS is delayed onset of muscle soreness. And it's that terrible feeling you get 24 to 48 hours after your first exercise session for a while that means you can barely walk down the stairs, and it can be, in many cases, enough to put people off exercise for life. The good news about DOMS is the more you exercise traditionally, the less you get it. So it's often a real barrier to those people recommencing exercise. But DOMS is reflective of this process called inflammation. And inflammation, a word that's also thrown around in modern language day in, day out. But what does that mean? Well, if I create damage, my body's got to repair that damage. And it does that by activating an immune response to create repair. And that immune response is called inflammation. So if I do some heavy weight training and my bicep has had some damage, my body will create a whole load of white blood cells and inflammatory markers that go there to repair it, rebuild it stronger again. But a byproduct of that might be discomfort, pain, swelling. So there's a really weird sweet spot between I don't want too much inflammation because that will make me super sore, unable to pick up my shopping bags and not want to train again. But I also don't want no inflammation because it's the chemical messenger to allow me to grow stronger. So what we're looking for in our post-exertion, post-exercise recovery strategies is this sweet spot between enough inflammation to generate change, but not so little inflammation that I don't get the trigger for change. And that's where we get this debate around things like ice baths. And you see, cold has become something that's enormously popular through everyone on any social media platform, anyone you've ever met at a dinner party. And that's for good reason. Cold is quite effective at managing mental health. It's quite effective at managing sleep. But it certainly seems to be effective at suppressing inflammation and managing, again, the recovery process in athletes. I think it was Andy Murray who was one of the first people we spotted in an ice bath after a 5-hour, 5-set thriller. And everyone thought, well, if Andy Murray's in an ice bath, then I need to be in an ice bath. But Andy Murray had played so much tennis and created so much muscle damage, and he might need to play tennis again the following day. He wanted to suppress that inflammatory signal, so he didn't want to get fitter from that tennis match. He wanted to suppress the benefit so he could be less sore to play optimally within 24, 36, 48 hours. So is an ice bath good for recovery? It's a great question. It depends what you're recovering from, and it depends what you want to achieve. We do know ice baths play a critical role in reducing post-exercise soreness. They reduce the blood flow to the area that's been working, and they reduce those inflammatory cells getting in there and causing the pain. But they might also blunt the benefit you're after. So for people looking to get big muscles, what we call hypertrophy work, there is a real jury's out moment on whether the ice bath would be a damage to that or something that's net neutral. When I'm looking at suppressing inflammation and managing that sweet spot between just enough, not too much, then we know massage still sits at the heart of inflammatory protocols, and it's generally been shown to reduce perceived soreness and our ability to perform tasks again. And what you'll see, because we know massage is good, is lots of modern technologies trying to replicate some of the impacts of massage, both in compression trousers and percussion massage guns. And the data on these is early, but it's also exciting and interesting. Compression trousers are those fancy trousers you see people wearing that whir and purr, and they're literally squeezing your legs and moving around all the metabolites of exercise. So all the waste product, all the debris from exercise, they're flushing that out and keeping circulation going. In many cases, they're mirroring what we might call active recovery, which is I've just finished playing a game of football. Did I cool down? Did I stretch? Did I walk for a period afterwards to flush it all out? Or did I finish the game, jump in the car, go home and jump in front of the TV? And this form of compression is showing, again, reduced perception of soreness and improved perception of recovery, which is exciting, as are these massage guns, which are a little bit more active. The trousers I just sit in, the massage gun I've got to do myself. And the data is also showing that these massage guns can be particularly effective at reducing injuries when they're used to pre-activate muscles before exertion. So it's a fascinating world where technology is meeting physiology, meeting product, meeting consumer understanding. So I'm in my optimal recovery modality. I've done my rehydration. I've done my refueling. I've made sure I'm going to sleep well tonight in the absence of caffeine and alcohol. I would possibly use cold, again, something around 10 to 15 degrees for, again, potentially 10 to 15 minutes to suppress unnecessary inflammation. I've got my recovery trousers on. I've used my percussion gun. Anything else I should be considering? Well, we're also seeing an increasing understanding of heat and light, and potentially the role of saunas and infrared therapies as part of a recovery toolkit also. Heat seems to keep the circulation flowing and falls into the same sort of category as an active recovery, me going for a walk or keeping my muscles pumping. Light's an interesting area. Infrared light and red light. Near infrared is a frequency that enters into the tissue layer and suppresses inflammation directly, and red light having a similar role on inflammation. So expect technologies that involve red lights and near infrared to boom in a marketplace of people who don't want to be sore and do want to train again. But not all recovery is physical. Lots of this protocol is for those, again, active individuals who are doing triathlons on their lunch break and training in the gym at the evening, and that's not most of us. 30% of the UK is getting less than 30 minutes of physical activity a week. That statistic tells us we don't need to be too focused on recovery for that audience, or do we? Well, if we think about recovery type 2, it is relevant to that group. Recovery part 2 is how do the rest of us get over a world that's constantly asking us to be switched on? How do I recover in the fact that everything I face today is telling me to be ready, to be, again, alert, to be anticipating? And that, over time, is exhausting. And recovery 2 is really about this idea of how does the modern person find stillness? How do they find the opportunity for their battery to not constantly be expending energy, but to recharge and to recoup? Now, actually, when we look at this recovery 2, lots of the physical elements from the first part also apply. We also want to make sure we're fueled adequately. We need to be hydrated, and sleep must sit absolutely at the heart of it. But we might need to think a little bit also above the body into the head and look at, again, mental strategies for recovery. It's really notable, again, how when Ben Earl spoke about his recovery protocol, he spoke about journaling. Why? Because he needed to get all the thoughts in his head out onto a piece of paper so they didn't either suppress his sleep or sit ruminating where they kept his body in a state of alertness. And that ability to offload our worries is a major part of physical and emotional recovery. If I tell someone about my worries, they're immediately halved. That's a well-known strategy for mental health, but it's also a recovery strategy. But when we're thinking about this recovery too, sharing and offloading what's in my mind is important, but also bringing my mind to a point of stillness is vital. We've seen meditation move from an Eastern philosophy to something that's got apps on every single phone in the land. And why? Well, meditation is potentially the antithesis, it's the antidote to modern living. The modern world is telling me to be 5 steps ahead, to be planning all the things that I need to do, but my physiology is chasing and racing to do that. Meditation is that opportunity to bring me to a singular point of focus. That could be a word, it could be listening to a visualization. But in that moment, I'm in that moment. And that extends to something that isn't a form of meditation, but its own principle, mindfulness. Mindfulness, a sense of being open and curious about the moment. As I sit here now, I'm looking down a screen, my feet are on the floor. How can I be in this moment, not in 10 years' time, or next month, or tonight, what have I got to be doing with the kids? The more I can live in the moment, the more my physiology can move out of an alert state into the place it's at now, where there is nothing to be switched on about. It can be calm, and in being calm, it can restore energy, it can recover. Our modern environment is chasing you to be alert and switched on every moment, and we need to now face, again, a deliberate battle to be still. Across both forms of recovery, there is an area that I do think is worth paying attention to, and that's breath. Breath is an incredible opportunity to slow your body down and drive recovery. Did you know every time you breathe in, your body gets a little bit alert and stressed, and every time you breathe out, your body gets a little bit calm and relaxed? There's a fight going on in your body every time you take a breath in and out for whether your body should be alert or calm. And if I want someone to improve their recovery in both settings, getting over physical sport and exertion, or just decompress from the modern world, then I'd want them breathing slowly. But I want that breath coming in and out of their nose. And I want that breath coming predominantly from their belly, not from their chest. And I'd want them to be really focused on slow exhalation, and maybe the exhaled breath as I breathe out, slightly longer in duration than my inhaled breath. And why I raise that is it doesn't need, again, intelligent equipment. It doesn't need high-end technology. It doesn't need access to nature. It needs you to draw yourself to the moment, slow and focus on your breathing, and that will bring recovery in all settings in which we require it and find it. It's been so interesting discussing recovery with such an incredible group of athletes and high-performing individuals on this podcast. And I do want you to understand there is no one-size-fits-all. From Ben Earl's journaling to Aaron Kraskell playing on his PlayStation, we all have to find our own way to decompress. If you're an athlete or training like an athlete with a busy life, I'd encourage you to get the basics right first and extend to technology. If you're someone who's living in a busy world and can't find their space to decompress, I would look at those same modalities, but apply those into your day-to-day existence. And I hope you find more recovery in your day-to-day existence and you feel more energy as a result.